Thanks, everyone. Can I first of all say that I'm incredibly honoured to be hosting the headline event of this festival, because I think you'll agree with me that this has been a fantastic festival, and I think we should have a round of applause for Henry and his team and the staff for making this such a great event. So this is a man who has graced your TV screens on many occasions, but has other strings to his bow that you might not have previously been aware of. He was nominated for a Best Actor BAFTA in 1994 for his portrayal of DS Tony Clark in Between the Lines. He made us all laugh, of course, as gambling addict Dave Charnley in the hit comedy series Drop the Dead Donkey. And on the big screen, you will have seen him take major roles in Fever Pitch and Bridget Jones' Diary, which I'm sure you've all seen. And he's also appeared in many stage productions by acclaimed writers such as Joe Orton, Harold Pinter, and Tom Stoppard. This is just a handful of the marvellous work that he has produced for us on both stage and screen. However, what you may not know is that he is, I've got to say this right, he's also an antiquarian book dealer specialising in the expatriate literary movement of Paris between the world wars. He conceived and subsequently co-produced The Missing Hancocks, recreating selected episodes of Galton and Simpson's Hancock's Half Hour for BBC Radio 4 after personally obtaining scripts for recordings that no longer existed. All of that aside, Neil is going to talk about the best-selling book, Madly, Deeply, the Alan Rickman Diaries. Alan Rickman remains one of the most beloved actors of all time across almost every genre. From his breakout role as Die Hard's villainous Hans Gruber to his heart-wrenching run as Professor Severus Snape and beyond. From 1993 until his death in 2016, he also kept diaries, anecdotal, indiscreet, witty, gossipy, utterly candid, over 1 million words in Rickman's calligraphic hand and adorned with beautiful illustrations, reflecting his previous career as a graphic designer. On Rickman's death, the diaries were passed to his friend and fellow actor Neil by his widow Rima, and acting on instruction, Neil secured a publishing deal with Canongate, and the diaries were published in hardback in October of 2022. In this In Conversation event, Neil will talk about the process of bringing those diaries to publication. Truly, madly, deeply, Neil Pearson.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Well, let's start as we mean to go on. Hello. Good to meet you. Hi, how are you? Who was that guy you were just describing? Because he sounds marvellous.
Well, we couldn't come, so I called you.
Thanks.
This is, what, your second time to Hertford? Because I did this yesterday with John Lyons, and John Lyons absolutely loved Hertford, so now you've got to say the same.
Yes, it's only to my shame, only my second visit. I came up for a pre-show talk through about how this might best go, and loved the place, delighted to be back, and I'm absolutely certain this won't be my last visit. It's a nice place you got here, and I can't wait to get to know it better.
Rob, get the membership forms ready. So, how has someone so instantly recognised as a highly popular actor become so engaged with the world of book publishing?
Well, I've always had the other string to my bow. I've been a rare book dealer now for 13, 14 years. I've always collected rare books. I've always read. And although I couldn't have articulated it when I was a kid, I think I always fetishized the object, the book itself, and enjoyed that as much as its contents. As looking back, I realized that I loved the heft of a book. I loved the way the weight was distributed and how that weight changed as you read, because pages went from your right hand to your left. And I loved the way American books smelled different from English books. And I only realized recently, I was told recently, that it was the gum. It's the gum used in the binding to keep the text block together. I didn't know. I suppose I could have worked it out, but I didn't. So I'd always loved the object. And as soon as I got a little bit of disposable income in the early 80s, I started to spend it on first editions, rare books. And rare can be a rather intimidating word about things. It means, quite often in people's minds, people always think expensive. Rare doesn't necessarily mean expensive, and common doesn't necessarily mean cheap. Shakespeare's first folio is common, but everyone wants one, which is why it costs £7 or £8 million. But collecting books is a very egalitarian form of collecting. If you own the Mona Lisa, then I can't own it until you sell or die. But if you own a first edition of Jane Eyre, well, good luck to you, but maybe I can find another one, and the hunt goes on. So I pootled around in the foothills when I had a little, but not much, disposable income, and the bug really bit, and I'm still doing it. So anyone who collects seriously deals. You horse trade, you upgrade, you get to know the world of fellow dealers, of auction houses, collectors, and so on. And so really setting up the business was just a formalizing of what I'd been doing for some time. And I guess, again, though I didn't anticipate it, I guess that it was natural that we deal a lot in performing arts, because my day job's address book has given me a head start in that area. So we sell a lot of material, both printed and original, in that area. And more we've got involved in looking for permanent homes, institutional homes, for archives of writers, directors, actors, and so on. And it's in that way that Alan's material first came to me.
So, when Alan's widow, Rima, first asked you to get involved with the publishing of Alan's diaries, what was your initial response?
Yes, please. What an honour. When Rima got in touch, we were given a three-pronged commission, if you like, to sell his library, just the books that had accreted around him over the course of a reading life, and that's bread and butter book selling. Nothing too difficult there, especially, of course, since a lot of them were inscribed by people he knew. The people he knew tended to be interesting, so they became association copies, which always adds a premium to books like that. Easily done. Look for a permanent home for his working archive, scripts, correspondence, shooting scripts, all the stuff that had accreted around him over the course of a professional life. And we're in the process of doing that now. And find a publisher for his diaries. As you said, he kept 27 years worth of diaries. Before that, he was keeping appointment books. He was a man who was very ordered. And I found, just as the hoary old thing of people tend to look like their dogs, and they have the characteristics of the dog they choose to have as their companion. Well, I'm here to tell you that people also look like their archives. Alan's archive, like Alan himself, was very ordered. And if a box said box 5A and it contains all that, it did contain all that. And everything was all in a row. And he'd done a lot of work that habitually I would expect to be doing. I got a head start because he'd done that. We also, by contrast, handled the archive of a poet and playwright and activist called Hertford Williams, who was a grand, Byronic, rather chaotic figure. And when we got his archive, it had appeared to have been dredged out of a swamp and then just fired at us out of a cannon. Absolutely as chaotic as its owner. So it was a joy to work on, not least, of course, because it was in order. And so with his working archive, great sense of order. With his life, as he chronicled it, ditto. We have appointment books going back to RADA, and before that, school. He started to keep a diary in '93, and he made Die Hard in '87, and then Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And it was at that point in his life, I think, where he thought, this isn't going away. That wasn't just a flash in the pan, and now I'm going back to great work, but rather less high-profile work at the RSC and maybe the West End, occasional Broadway. But no, he's now a movie star, and he thought, again, great sense of order, I'll start writing this down in more detail. Now, we never got to know exactly what he planned to do with the diaries, but quite often they do read as if they are a future aid memoir to something more substantial from him. Bookmarks on various things that had happened to him prior to writing a memoir, an autobiography, whatever it might have been. That's a guess, but I'm fairly confident about that guess. Sadly, we never got to read that. But on Alan's death, Rima got in touch with me and asked if I would find a publisher for the diaries. I'll anticipate the question because it will come up. Would Alan have wanted those diaries published? I'm certain that he would, because Rima is certain that he would. Rima and Alan were together from their mid-teens. They met in Amdram in West London, where both of them lived. Rather touchingly, in his library, there are 2 copies of an ennui play, dated 1960-something, and one's got his name in it and one's got her name in it, and it was a play they worked on in the local amateur dramatic society. And they were together for the rest of their lives. So if Rima says Alan would have wanted these published, I'm hearing we want these published. So I was very happy to go along with her on that basis and find a publisher who would, of course, do a good professional job of publishing the diaries, but they're rather more than that. As you've heard, Alan was a graphic designer. He was a trained graphic designer. He didn't do his first professional acting job until he was 28 in the Library Theatre at Manchester. And I think that was the secret to how he was so centered, balanced, and could cope with what life threw at him later on in terms of fame and profile. He was able to keep his feet on the ground and continue to hold on to the values and the work ethic that he had prior to that phase of his career. But because he was a graphic designer, his diaries are also beautiful. I hesitate to call the drawings in them doodles. He would probably have called them doodles, but you'll see if you've seen, or there will be copies up the back later, some illustrations of his illustrations in the original diaries. And they are beautiful. So we were looking for a publisher that would make the object beautiful. And of course, as you've heard, with my background in collecting rare books, that was music to my ears. That was the sort of publisher I wanted on board for this project, and Canongate have done a fabulous job in that respect.
So how many publishers did you speak to? Because obviously Canongate got the gig, but how many others? And was it because that you didn't feel that they would do such a beautiful job that they were turned down?
Canongate have a history, a very illustrious history of publishing beautiful objects as well as merely books. And they also have a very illustrious back catalogue when it comes to diaries and anthologies of diaries. And they had in-house the man who ended up editing the Alan Rickman diaries, distilling that 1,000,000 words down to that book, a man called Alan Taylor, who's the editor of the Scottish Review of Books. Great writer in his own right, but absolutely forensic in how to distill a story. Great editor. And because he was in-house, and because they'd published many diaries before, and because they'd made them look so beautiful in doing so, we were keen that it would be them. There were other considerations, and of course money would be a consideration. And if you tell the publishing world, look guys, we've got 27 years of Alan Rickman's life written by Alan Rickman, interested? Yes, people tend to be interested. So that kept the price healthy. This was all sort of new territory to me, and I certainly didn't do it on my own, and that would have been a dereliction of duty, because I don't have the experience to do that sort of job as well as it should be done. But I recruited people who did. We had a literary agent on board, and we put together a prospectus, which I knew how to do, and we put the prospectus in front of publishers, and then the publishers came back to us, and we were extremely gratified because there were a lot of them and a great deal of interest. So Canongate won the race, but it was a fairly hotly contested race.
So because of the nature of what I do for a living, I know how long it takes to edit a book, and I usually get one with about 300,000 words in it. I was going to ask you about how long the process took from commissioning to the publication, especially as this was 1,000,000 words to edit, which is a hell of a number of words to edit. But also, did you and Alan's family stay involved in the whole process?
No, I think there comes a point, and this is also true if you've written a play or a screenplay and you're handing it over for production, you have to let the baby go. You have to let the people whose job it is to produce the finished product from that raw material, you have to allow them to do precisely that. Now, once they've done it, you can have an opinion, take a view. There were things that changed, decisions that were changed, and so it was tweaked. But the main work in distilling it down was in very capable hands, and it would have been foolish of us to be involved. It's not what we're trained to do. It's not what we're best at. And having just recruited the people who are, why would you get in their way?
One of the things that I know from you about Alan Rickman was that he was quite a private person. So obviously these diaries he did write privately, but as you've said, Rima says that he would have been happy to have them published. But can we therefore learn, and obviously as Neil has so rightly said, and I will reiterate that the books will be available from the back there after this talk. But what can we expect to find out about Alan that we didn't know before? Because he was a private person. He wasn't often interviewed. So do you feel that there is a lot in this book where people will engage even more with Alan Rickman, who is already a much-loved character?
There's a very big and very important difference, I think, between private and secretive, and especially reclusive. And all three of those, I think, are very often thrown around wildly inaccurately about all sorts of people. Practically everyone on earth lives privately. And wanting to continue to do that, even if you are employed in an area which gives you some public face, does not seem to me to be exceptional, does not seem to me to be an unreasonable thing to ask for. Similarly, almost no one who is described as reclusive, by the way, is reclusive. Samuel Beckett, often described as a recluse because he never gave interviews, and very few people do give interviews and they're not described as recluse. He had his own stationery. Recluses do not have their own stationery. They don't set aside a couple of hours a day to write to strangers. All it meant when journalists called Beckett and other people like him reclusive was they couldn't get an interview. Now, Alan was not especially enamored of the press. Can anyone blame him? And was not particularly a fan of giving interviews. But if he knew that he would have fun, or if he knew that the person that he was going to be talking to would be intelligent, witty, as indiscreet as Alan was, and we'll get to that, then he was happy to do it. I think he certainly unbuttoned in that respect towards the end of his life, possibly when he realized that his career was absolutely secure. You can go on Google and see any number of late night chat show appearances in the States with Conan O'Brien and others, where he's having the time of his life, where he's sitting alongside people who are doing Alan Rickman impressions in his face. He was very happy to talk publicly as long as he thought he would feel comfortable in the company he would be keeping. He also had quite a close and long-standing inner sanctum of friends. I was not one of those. I knew him. I wasn't a very close friend of Alan, but I did know him. But he had an inner sanctum of friends, mostly women, with whom he'd worked from the year dot, to whom he was loyal throughout his career. And that circle of friends stuck together right the way through his life. It's often forgotten, or possibly not known, that Die Hard was Alan Rickman's first film. Quite often people think, quite naturally, that he would have made those smaller movies first, and that they were the calling cards and the stepping stones to get in the big Hollywood Euro-terrorist role that can make a career. He was doing Private Lives on stage on Broadway and making a very big stir in so doing, got an audition for it and got the gig. And as a result of that, he was able to get those other films made because he was going to be in them or he was going to co-produce or whatever. But the money suddenly was available because the guy who just played Hans Gruber wanted to be involved. So that was a professional manifestation of Alan's friendship. He didn't cease to think a script was good because he could now make Die Hard 2 for $10 million. He wanted to make the script he thought was good before he'd made Die Hard 1, and now he's made Die Hard 1, he can come back and do that. And that's how Truly, Madly, Deeply got made. It's how Close My Eyes got made. It's how those smaller British films got made that were very close to his heart. And were also, of course, stepping stones for everyone else who was in it. Again, an act of friendship.
And it very much sounds like the way that he chose films. He would have been very proud of the way that you chose the publisher, which is in much the same vein. I'm going to do this a little differently to the way that I spoke yesterday with John Lyons, and open this up a lot earlier to the audience, because I'm anticipating that you've got quite a few questions for Neil. So who's going to start with a question?
Who's first? Any takers?
There's a gentleman up the back there.
Which one's that? Oh. The man who just won the lottery with a big check shirt on.
Thank you very much. It strikes me that Alan Rickman and Alan Alda were very similar in the way they approached their acting career. Did Alan Rickman have any heroes, any people he referred to through his diaries?
Good question, sir. Yes, he did. It's very interesting to see. Alan was used, even before he was Alan Rickman superstar, he was used to associating with known faces, big talents, because people, even before he'd cemented his own reputation, everyone in the business knew how good he was and wanted him in the shows they were doing. So he, and also, again, because he started late, I guess he had a little less of that sort of starting out teeny bopper thing of being overly impressed just by being in the same room with someone. So it is particularly instructive to see when he does go a little teen fandom, because it happens occasionally in the diaries, and one of the people that does it for him is I think German, possibly Austrian actor called Bruno Ganz, who some of you will know. He was in a Ripley movie that Wim Wenders made. He was in Coriolanus, which was directed by Deborah Warner, a friend of Alan, and he went out with Fiona Shaw to see it in Vienna, and he was, I'll read you what he says about it, because it's only short, but it tells you exactly what Alan valued in an actor. This is 27th of July 1993. To Festspielhaus for Coriolan, staggering venue. Hildegard Beckler, who is the designer, her model is now full, unbelievable size. A sudden, strange desire to be in it. And we almost are in the third row. 200 extras, horses, flames, epic, but ambiguous too. Bruno Ganz is the one for me. Seems not to be an actor at all. At the party, I meet him. Shy, courteous, quiet, slight. Of course. It's that underplaying, that back foot, that humility that he actually kept throughout his life, that he valued most in others. He was a massive fan of Tom Waits. There is one very short entry in it, in the diary, where he says, 4 words, "I met Tom Waits." And you think, how old are you? This was when he was about 50. He was also a massive tennis fan, and absolutely shamelessly every year used all the clout he had to get the best possible seats at Wimbledon. Well, you would, wouldn't you? And the 3rd of July 2011 saw him at the men's final at Wimbledon. 3rd of July. Men's final, Nadal versus Djokovic. Unforgettable experience, unforgettable day of contrasts. On the balcony of the main entrance, and then into lunch at the Duchess of Gloucester's table. Wrong man, Djokovic, all triumph and ego, won. But Bjorn Borg came over and asked for a photograph. "Are you kidding?" I spluttered. John Major said, "You have given us so much enjoyment. I wish I could say the same of you," was the unstoppable reply. He had the grace to laugh.
Any other questions? Looking for hands or knees.
While you're looking, I'll go on here. He had a very good pastoral manner. He was a great encourager of young people. And of course, the Harry Potter crew grew up on that set. And I've heard more than one of them say that when they were kids, I mean proper kids, for the first 2 films or so, it was just playtime every day. And they'd go in and they'd run around. There'd be a few adults in funny frocks, but it was their playground. And as they got to 14, 15, 16, and started to develop their own cultural hinterland and see films that they were choosing and not their parents and so on, it slowly started to dawn on them who they were working with, because pretty much everyone was in these movies. And so, you know, they weren't just coming in to work with that bloke who plays Snape anymore. They were coming in to work with the bloke who played Hans Gruber. And they weren't just coming in to work, you know, it was Maggie Smith and, well, you know who's in it, everybody, Ray Fiennes, Gary Oldman, la la la, we could be here all night. And he was brilliant at making young people feel valued, at making them understand what they knew and what they could do, and also without threatening their own confidence, reminding them how much they had to learn. And he didn't do that in any sort of stern or dictatorial way. He did it by making it fun, by telling them to watch that guy, he's called Richard Harris, he knows something. And so, like all the best teachers, I think, the learning process became play. He did a play called The Winter Guest at the Almeida Theatre in London, which he later turned into a film with Emma Thompson and her mother Phyllida Law. And there were quite a few kids in that as well. I think he tended to look for material that most people look to avoid. You know, the thing about, you know, don't work with kids. When I watch American child actors, they're brilliant, but I worry for them, because you think you shouldn't be able to do that at 8. And my money's telling me that you're going to be in the Betty Ford clinic by 12. There's a sort of knowingness and an awareness and an adultness that is brilliant for the piece. But I always worry that it's terrible for the child. Might be wrong, I have absolutely no psychological expertise there, but it always worries me. And when you get the British child actors who tend not to have that savoir-faire at 8 or 9 or 10, and they're a little clunky on stage, or you have to lean right forward to hear them, I don't mind. I don't mind, because that's what an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old should be like. But Alan managed to find a sort of middle way between those two things. He managed to get the best possible performances out of people who, by the end of whatever that show was, were still kids. And they seemed to love him at the time and retrospectively love him for doing that, because I think they came to realize how well he looked after them on a set. And you can see in his archive the letters he got from all sorts of kids, from the people who he escorted round the set on Harry Potter. And how exciting must that have been, to have been given a backstage tour of Hogwarts when you're 9. To the people he worked with who went on to be pro actors, who continued to want to pick his brains. He was great at doing that, and looked after fellow adults pretty well as well. All of which is just to tee up this very short entry from the 29th of December 2008, when he goes to visit Daniel Radcliffe in New York, the now grown-up Daniel Radcliffe. 1 p.m. lunch with Daniel Radcliffe at Cafe Cluny. 1 minute he was 12, now he's 19. When did that happen? And he's sensitive, articulate, and smart, and owns a 3-bedroom apartment in New York.
Right, we have some more questions.
Hello. I haven't read the diaries yet, but I'm wondering, from your knowledge of the man, is there a role that he aspired to perform, but time ran out for him?
He certainly doesn't write any down. I don't think he was... He did a lot of Shakespeare in the early stages of his career. He had 2 stints at the Royal Shakespeare Company. The first one nearly broke him. He hated it. He called it on more than one occasion a sausage factory. He didn't like the way they worked. He didn't like the final productions they were looking to stage. He met, for the first time, a lot of people who became lifelong friends. Ruby Wax was one, Juliet Stevenson was another. But he didn't have a good time there and seriously considered giving up acting altogether after the first tour of duty there. So I don't think he was hankering to play King Lear or Iago. He'd have been a great Iago, now I come to think of it. I think what he was mostly interested in doing was enabling. He wanted to get mostly new material done. He wanted to get films up and running. He wanted to get plays staged. And quite often he staged them himself. He was involved in a tremendously important piece of political theatre called My Name is Rachel Corrie. Rachel Corrie was a young activist who was killed in the occupied territories when she was run over by an Israeli bulldozer. He devised, with Catherine Viner, the whole play. It was a one-woman show. He directed it. He put it on at the court. He tried to take it to New York, and it's still a matter of great controversy that it was prevented from opening. It opened around the world in a number of venues. Great big hit. It was that sort of material, that sort of urgent now material that I think was of most interest to him. I mean, of course, he was interested in the part and all of that, but I don't think he had a list of classical roles that he was keen to tick off. I think he would have started a lot earlier if that was true. And as I say, I think his early experience at the Royal Shakespeare Company to some extent anaesthetized him against that tendency.
Hi. Do you know what his method of acting was, or the process he took to get on stage?
Yes, sir, I do. So we pick it up after his first tour of duty at the RSC. He's at the Bush Theatre in London, a very famous address for new writing, new plays, new writers, and having a good time there in a play that was directed by Richard Wilson, who was one of his mentors, by the way. Yes, Victor Meldrew, but also Richard Wilson, a very, very fine theatre director, from whom Alan learnt a lot, and to whom he owed a lot, he always said. That play was on, and Max Stafford Clark, then the artistic director of the Royal Court, went to see it, loved him, and took him to the Royal Court in the early 80s to play a string of young male leads. And it was there that he learnt his small m method, his way of working. And you can look at his film rehearsal scripts, you can look at his later theatre scripts. every time he worked in any medium, on any scale, he worked the Royal Court way. One of the things you did at the Royal Court, and I was at the Royal Court at the time quite a lot. I was working there. My girlfriend was, at the time, was assistant artistic director there. So I knew the ins and outs of this. Actioning was a big thing at the Royal Court. You would sit for the first 2 weeks of a 4-week rehearsal period around a table as the cast, and you would ascribe an active verb to every line you had, so that every line you had an intention. What am I doing? So, can I have £5, please? You needed to know who you were saying it to, and were you saying it malevolently, pleadingly, annoyingly? You had to hone it down. Now, through rehearsal, of course, that could change, but you had to start with something. You had to start with an intention to change things by speaking. The Royal Court was also keen on you knowing what it was you thought about yourself in the play, your character, what you say about yourself in the show, what other characters say about you in the show, what they say about you when you're not there in the show. All of these things would then be synthesized into a final distilled performance. He swore by it. It worked beautifully for him. Me, not so much. And quite a few people, I found it a little overly prescriptive. I thought, well, I found myself just trying to come up with ever more ludicrous verbs to chuck in. He rubbishes her. But he found a working method that served him all the way through his career. And you can see its effects because Hans Gruber in Die Hard, there are lots of characters like that in films like that. The Euro-terrorist, the, metaphorically at least, moustache-twirling, overeducated, elegant psychopath. There's more than one, but we only know the name of one. We only know Hans Gruber as Hans Gruber because Rickman's depiction of him was so particular, so carefully delineated. We knew what he liked. We knew where he got his suits from. We knew how his mind worked when he wasn't actually killing people. He had a hinterland beyond the reason he was in the script. And he got that from that method that he got in the early 80s in Sloane Square.
More questions? Don't look away now.
Can I ask a question about when Alan Rickman was in the Prince of Thieves, and when it all finished, he was the most important person, even though there was a Kevin Costner and a Morgan Freeman in there. How did he feel? Did he put anything in his diary about him being the most important person to us?
Well, the detailed diaries start after he'd made that film. So I think that's possibly good news for us, because maybe there would have been something libelous in them had they started that early. There have been, for a long time, lots of stories swirling around about how he stole that show, about how Kevin Costner got annoyed because that had happened, how he was insisting on getting... Most of this stuff is not true. But something that is true is that Alan very much did a lot of work on that performance. Of course, that's what he was there to do. But he also did quite a bit of work on that script. And it wasn't all his work. He had a couple of writers within his inner sanctum who helped him come up with those lines we know, my chamber, 9 o'clock, bring a friend. Christmas is cancelled. All of that stuff was not in it until he his writer friends put it there. And of course, why would you cut that? You know, if people are coming to you with that, and you know, it's going to supercharge the movie. But that happens sometimes. Sean Connery did this on the Indiana Jones film that he made. This is hugely indiscreet. Fuck it. He went to Tom Stoppard to get him to polish his script. You know, I mean, seems unfair, really, doesn't it? The greatest writer alive polishing your script. And Harrison Ford just couldn't work out why he wasn't getting a look in any of the scenes that he was in with Sean Connery. That was why. Tom Stoppard denies it. He does a lot of script doctoring anonymously and extremely lucratively. But someone told me that they'd seen it, but he denies it. My friend told me that they saw a card, a business card that Tom Stoppard had that says, Tom Stoppard, script doctor, making the unspeakable speakable. It worked for Sean Connery.
Anyone else with a question?
I just wanted to know if there's sort of a lot of talk about his personal family, and you talk about that because obviously he writes a lot about his productions, movies, but is there also a lot of talk about family, his life?
Rima is not mentioned often, but is always in it, if that makes sense. They didn't have children. They were devoted to each other, and she had and has a very rich and busy life of her own. She was a Labour councillor in Kensington, Chelsea. She's an economist. She has things to do. She didn't just follow her husband around the place, but whenever she could, she did. And so they spent a lot of time together, and I don't think I don't get the feeling that he's shutting us out. As I say, she's always there, and if she says something funny or he needs some sort of support, she's always says the right thing, and she's there. But he goes to a lot of restaurants, he goes to a lot of openings, he goes to a lot of do's, and quite often there are cast lists of pretty much everyone you've ever heard of, you know, and are, just are. And at first reading, I thought, oh, is this a little dismissive? Is this? But the more you see that letter, and you see it a lot all the way through the book, the more you realise that she's absolutely present all the time. She's certainly wasn't ignored in life and not ignored in print, just looked after.
Hang on a second, more questions. From the lady who made the curtains for us, Penny. Be afraid, be very afraid.
I'm bracing myself.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Bit nervous. Anyway, I'm just wondering. I know he was on stage a lot and very entertaining. And I loved the cancelled Christmas thing, and I love that. You're saying he produced things as well, and I'm just wondering if he wrote any plays that he wasn't actually in. So how involved did he get in possibly writing things and producing things that he could have been in or not in, if you get my meaning?
I do. He wasn't a playwright, although he did devise My Name is Rachel Corrie at the Royal Court, which I've talked about. But that was distilled from verbatim letters, emails, and so on. So it wasn't concocted, it was collated. So he wasn't a playwright. He did put money in things, but he was mostly, in that respect, a promoter. Right the way back, Richard Attenborough invited him to join the board of RADA, where Alan himself trained, and he jumped at the chance and was on the board there all his life. He was involved in a consortium that tried to take over the Riverside Studios in West London. Eventually lost out to the Women's Playhouse Trust, but that would have been a home for new writing, new writers, and so on. So it would have been difficult for him to do more in that area, given how much he worked in his primary role, and given how often he was away, because, you know, especially producing is very hands-on. You have to sort of be there. You're casting everyone, not just people in front of the camera, but behind. And he saw himself primarily as an actor. That's what he wanted to be. But he also wanted other people to be able to work too, and he knew he could enable that. So he never, I don't think, had any aspiration to be either a playwright or certainly a full-time producer. But he did what he could to make sure people worked.
Another young lady at the back here. You're doing well with the young ladies.
No, stepping away from the feed line.
Thank you. I was just wondering, I mean, obviously, we all hate the sound of our own voice, as I do right now. Obviously, Alan Rickman's voice was utterly unique, and I wonder, did he embrace that? I mean, was that something that when he watched himself back he was comfortable with, or indeed any of his performance techniques?
Yeah, I think he was, not every actor can do this, but I think he was able to watch dispassionately the work. He certainly didn't avoid his own performances, his own films. He was very complimentary of other people in them. Usually held his peace about his own contribution, but other people were happy to speak for him, so no problem there. I don't think, I mean, he was certainly not backward in coming forward about what he thought about other people's films. He was a very good critic and a very good audience member. I mean, when he wasn't working, he was at the theatre 4 or 5 times a week and was seeing 4 or 5 movies a week. He was very much au fait with what was going on, who was coming through, and also was as likely to have a good night out and find good things to talk about and encourage in a two-hander play put on in a room over a pub, as he was to go and see the latest thing that was opening at the Olivier at the National Theatre. He was no respecter of reputation for reputation's sake, and if you didn't have a reputation, well, that's okay, I'll give you an audience too. But he was always, you hoped what you did, Alan liked, because he could dislike something memorably. You know, it's a knack. Here's what he said about the film About a Boy. Do we know that? Hugh Grant, yeah. The kind of depressing English film where single mothers and amnesty workers are ugly people in oversized sweaters. 12 Years a Slave. A great film, I'm told. Would I watch it twice? No. What does it say? Should Chiwetel Ejiofor get an Oscar? No, he's in it a lot looking worried and breathing heavily. Is that enough? Fassbinder, Michael Fassbinder, however, is very fine. Makes you ferret to understand him. But somehow I was always watching actors, not a story. Now, that's not necessarily an opinion you will share, but it's certainly an opinion you can respect. You can see what he means. And I love that sentence makes you ferret to understand him. Where did that verb come from? Probably the royal court, actually. But what does it mean? Does it make, you know, you're leaning forward, he's drawing you in? Let's do one more. And this, again, here we go. Young actor coming through. Billy Elliot. Jamie Bell is quite wonderful, played the title role. Not a sentimental second in his performance. The film is Stephen Daldry at his most calculating. It's almost as if he's fed the requirements into a computer. The film could have been beautiful, but its cynical use of the miners' strike added to a long list of untruths. The Boy in the Dress, The Snowman, The Brothers' Change of Heart make the newspaper headlines the best British film ever. An insult to Joseph Losey, John Schlesinger, Lindsay Anderson, Powell and Pressburger, Mike Newell, Antti Minghella, and the rest. So he was steeped in his job's history as well, and didn't see it as history, saw it as very much something that should be informing the present. And these were all good things to pass on to people who were younger than him. But I love the way he's able not to enjoy a film much, but to see the diamond in the rough.
Any other questions? We've run out of young ladies.
Here's one.
Who was that?
See, I knew you'd have better questions than me. Even my wife had a better question than me, which is embarrassing. I now feel like one of those bands at Glastonbury who make the audience sing the chorus.
You're doing better than that.
And I've just made Neil spit his water out. Which has now ruined my notes.
Your fault.
So what I'm going to do now, because of that, is to talk a little bit about Neil himself and what's coming up. And quite excitingly, Drop the Dead Donkey is now coming to the stage. And you'll be happy to know, you fans of Drop the Dead Donkey, it's with all of the original cast. So...
Well, not quite all. One of us is dead.
Yeah, he's not.
So that would be extraordinary. Sadly, David Swift, who played Henry, won't be with us, but the rest of us will be there.
So can you let everyone know where they can buy tickets and where it's going to be on?
Yeah, well, I think we start rehearsals in January, so it's a while yet. And we've got to live that long first. We rehearse in January. I think we open in February in Richmond, and then we're doing a 16-date tour of a week in 16 different venues around the country. It'll be fun, I think. And we've got, as I said, the same cast. We've got the same writers, Andy Hamilton and Guy Jenkin. We're going to do the same sort of topicals. It's going to be a challenge, I think, partly because it's been a while and the world has changed, and the news, or at least the news gathering, has become almost self-parodic now. I mean, in an era of GB News, that sort of very partisan method of news gathering and news dissemination, we'll be living in a very different world theatrically. So we're mindful of that. We're also mindful that the main thing we have to be is funny. So let's see how we do. But the idea was put to us, and we all looked at each other and went, yeah, let's do that. So see you there, I hope.
It better be good, because we've already bought tickets. And can I mention... Yep, so the next time that you can see Neil on television is in the new series of Silent Witness. So make sure that you watch that. I'm sure he's going to be excellent.
It's series 27. I'm vaguely insulted that it's taken 27 series before they got to me. Well, I hesitate to say it's a lot of fun because it's an absolute bloodbath. But it's a good bunch of people and a well-oiled machine, which after 27 years it should be.
Okay, so I'm just going to finish off by saying that I hope that Neil has told you enough about the book, Alan Rickman's wonderful book, for you to want to purchase a copy. There are copies at the back of the room for sale. Even though it's not Neil's book, he will sign them for you if you want them signed and be photographed with you. So that's an opportunity that you shouldn't miss at the end of this. And hopefully he's going to agree with that because I've said it now. But also, I do have to tell you that in about 5-6 days' time, I think it's July the 6th, the paperback of the book is being released. But if, like me, you still love the feel of a hardback, then purchase it today. Don't say that. But please, can you give it up for Neil? Because I think this has been a wonderful chat and a great way to end this magnificent literary festival.